Hi, I'm John Cuddeback.
And I'm Sophia Cuddeback.
If you're wondering whether you can really be friends with your spouse
and raise children into responsible adults with whom you have a relationship
and do what it takes to make a homestead, reconnecting with your body and the land wherever you live.
If you just want to think more about how to make a truly happy home in our trying times,
then The Intentional Household, a LifeCraft podcast, is for you. Join us. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to share that the guest today in this episode is my good friend, Chris Vander Woude, who has some wonderful things to share with us about a really amazing person and life situation he has experienced directly.
Hi, John. Thank you. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. Well, let me tell the world a little bit about who you are, and then we'll jump in. Chris is the fifth of the 7 sons born to Tom and Mary Ellen Vander Woude. Chris and his wife Katie and their 10-year-old daughter Zaylee live outside Manassas, Virginia. Chris has worked in education for 18 years, including as the Dean of Students and Athletic Director at various Catholic schools at all levels, from K through college. He graduated from Christendom College in 2002 with a degree in history. He and his wife have participated in various ministries, including youth ministry and diocesan marriage preparation. They enjoy spending time with their large families on both sides, as well as working on their property, which includes raising chickens and trying to grow vegetables. I'm sure they're a little better at that than that lets on. Chris is starting to spread the powerful story of his dad, Tom Vander Woude, while also laying the groundwork for his possible cause for canonization by working with the Tom Vander Woude Guild. So I know a bit about your dad's story that I'm sure I'm going to learn some more here today. But before we get into that story, tell us a little bit about the story of the interesting thing of kind of where things are now in this thing that can be confusing to people, whether you're Catholic or not. It can be kind of confusing. Like, how does one, quote, become a saint? Can you just tell us a little bit about what that means and where you are with your dad?
Sure. Yeah, it's a great joy to share that and talk about it. So the canonization process, basically, the Catholic Church recognizes publicly that certain individuals, when they pass, are in fact in heaven, and beyond being just in heaven, they recognize them as blessed or saints, especially to bring their life and their example to the public, to the laity, to make an example for the laity to follow, bring their different lives, maybe for the laity to connect to, and also pray for their intercession. So the process is a very detailed, thorough one, which is a good thing. It gives us some reassurances that not everybody is getting the saint before their name. The process starts generally at the local level with regards to either people talking about the sanctity of a person or maybe reported miracles. Or it'll happen after time, generally, if somebody writes a book about somebody's life and all of a sudden there's this exposure of this saintly life. And so basically the quick steps are that the local diocese is generally the one that is obviously involved because it goes through the local diocese and the bishop. And so they first need to sign off. And then there's an initial investigation before they request to Rome to open someone's cause, saying, we think we have something here with this person. We would like to formally open this cause, declare that person a servant of God. And then a very thorough investigation happens at the local level in communication with Rome, talking to eyewitnesses, evaluating the life of the person, evaluating alleged miracles to confirm their authenticity, lots of interviews, and then everything is shipped over to Rome, and Rome takes it over in the Dicastery of the Saints, which is an office of bishops and cardinals that kind of oversees this process, along with a number of lay individuals. Kind of dive in and they examine and pour through everything, and we'll have further documentation and discussions. They have a panel that will evaluate the alleged miracles, and then after that they kind of determine yes or no. Along that same line, there are miraculous requirements. So in order for a person to kind of progress through the stages, a certain number of miracles have to be reported and documented as actual miracles in order for them to progress. And so we are in the very initial stages for my dad. A small group started the Tom Vander Woude Guild a few years back. along with a local priest that knew my father, and their cause really is to bring awareness of his life and promote his cause. And right now, the diocese has taken the first initial steps by hiring a postulator, which is somebody that lives in Rome and kind of knows the ins and outs of the process. And they've also agreed to be the petitioner. So if a cause does open, the petition that is sent to Rome is sent by a petitioner. And in this case, the Arlington Diocese and Bishop Burbidge have agreed that they would be the ones to do that. So those are very good initial steps. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of the update as far as where we are in the overall process.
Yeah, well, that's great. Actually, that laid it out very clearly. I didn't even say out loud. I mean, there's just so much amazing here. How your experience. It's kind of hard for me to even think about. Here, am I having this conversation with you about introducing the process to consider your father to be a saint. This, of course, one thing that was a huge part of that is he gave his life for his son, your brother.
Yeah.
And this story, very fittingly, has already started to spread, and we certainly hope will spread a lot further. And I'm very, very excited for you to share that. But I know this is not something that you and your family immediately said, "Hey, wow, we got to see whether we can turn Dad into a saint," as it were. I know people have been coming to you and been sharing the kinds of stories already, both about your dad when he was alive and certain things afterwards, that have just really given them a sense of, hey, this might really be a great gift to God's people if we share this story. And of course, the canonization process is a beautiful way, naturally, that story can get shared, regardless of exactly what the outcome is, right? There's no doubt that people are going to be very inspired by what they're about to hear you share.
Yeah, that's the truth. This group of retired laymen and the priests are kind of the ones that kind of got it started. I mean, I think many people that knew Dad and the family included, obviously, especially the way Dad left this world, thought he's probably in heaven. That's different than going through the process and the church publicly recognizing that somebody is in fact in heaven and their life is worthy of imitation. And yes, you can pray to him. And so my involvement really just got started last year, and was asked to give a talk on Dad's life. And it was kind of the first time. And so, given that talk and seeing how it impacts people, you're kind of scratching your head thinking, man, maybe it is time. It's a great, powerful story of an ordinary, simple man that so many people can connect to, and so many people who knew him feel so strongly about the type of man he was. Maybe it's time to kind of get a little bit more involved and start sharing. And, obviously it's God's plan whether or not he is actually canonized, but the power of his story, especially in today's time and culture, I think is very fitting, whether or not God chooses to allow Dad and grace Dad with the actual title of saint.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, though I know the story, I'm just chomping at the bit to hear it again, just because, well, great stories are worth retelling. And this one doesn't get better in the retelling. It just keeps coming out in all goodness. It's because the story is well. Please, I know you'll probably give us a little bit of background of your brothers and kind of, their relation there, they're on the homestead to Dad, but paint that picture for us and tell us about that amazing day.
Sure. Yeah, I'll give a quick background. I mean, basically, Mom and Dad are from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Dad grew up on a big farm. At his core, he was a farmer and liked the farm life. In that sense, it's providential and fitting that the end of his life also was on a farm, a small farm that he and Mom bought. He was in the military, flew A-7s off a carrier in the Tonkin Gulf during Vietnam. He kind of had a little need for speed, and then went into commercial airlines, was a pilot. And in the early 1970s, Mom and Dad started doing the family rosary. It was a big part of their life. Right around 1981, they moved up to Virginia and kind of left everything in Georgia to pick up because they heard about this Catholic high school called Seton, and they wanted their sons to go there. Dad and Mom threw themselves fully into that school. Dad has been described as kind of the St. Joseph person, kind of quiet. He'll talk when he needs to, but always doing stuff for people, and usually it was behind the scenes. And so, whether or not it was Seton, whether or not it was helping with the Holy Trinity when it was founded, whether or not it was his time at Christendom, he was always serving and sacrificing, and I think that's the way he left this world, just kind of shines a light on those activities and virtues for the rest of his life leading up to that point. So as mentioned, John, I'm the fifth of seven sons. Our youngest, Joseph, has Down syndrome. He was born in 1987, and mom and dad just threw themselves into nurturing and raising him and doing everything they needed to do to make sure that he was treated just like any of the other sons. Joseph's a huge part of our family, to the point where when people come up to me and they say, I know your brother, it's usually my first guess is Father Tom Vander Woude, because he's a priest and a lot of people know priests. And my second guess is Joseph, because he's the second most popular Vander Woude, I think, behind Father Tom. But he would probably argue that he's the first. So anyway, our whole family kind of changed when he was born, and the focus towards him. And I think anybody that's been around or has experienced anybody with special needs, whether or not that is a parent in their older years or whether or not that's a child or a friend, the love that it demands and changes with what you are expected and how your love must increase and focus on that person is tremendous. Dad and Joseph spent a lot of time together, especially in his years when he retired. He was always at Dad's side, especially when he was working at Christendom. I kind of became the fan favorite. And
he was the athletic director, right?
So he was athletic director and career development.
Okay.
But as the athletic director and coach, Joseph basically came with Dad to work at Christendom. And so Joseph was either shooting hoops or singing on the microphone or chumming it up with the college kids. But after Christendom, Dad coached at Seton, and Joseph had a uniform. He'd do the warm-ups. There's a rumor that he even snuck Joseph in a game one time after prepping it with the opponent coach. So Dad and Joseph were kind of, once Dad retired, Dad and Joseph were always together. So it was on September 8th, 2008. On the family farm, Mom, Dad, and Joseph kind of just got back from morning mass. They go to daily mass at Holy Trinity. Right, growing up on a farm, living on a farm, there's always something to do. You never sit back on a farm and say, "Oh, we got it all taken care of," right? So Dad and Joseph kind of head outside to start on the chores, and Mom was inside. Dad was having some work done on the house, so there was a workman also doing some work on the house. I think it's the parental sixth sense when you know something's off. And Dad came around the house, and I think what was off was he didn't see Joseph anymore. And when you've lived on a property for so long, when something is off. You can tell when there's a door open or when a tree's fallen, even though it's a small tree, because it's usually up. So as Dad approached, I think he noticed very quickly that something was off, and that something that was off was the top to the family septic tank, which is like a 2x2 concrete lid. Basically over time, gave way when Joseph walked across it, just passing across it. And I walked across that in my youth, many people, growing up. So Joseph fell into the septic tank. So Dad came upon him, obviously saw Joseph struggling, not totally submerged, but definitely struggling. And Dad was a very wise man. And growing up on a farm, I think very quickly, Dad realized the dangers that lurked down in that septic tank, especially the fumes beyond the filth. So Dad, the workman was outside working on this house, so he yelled to the workman to tell my mom to call 911. And my dad did not call 911. Obviously he knew it was bad by the time, and then he jumped in, and obviously he didn't think about what else could I do right now? Dad was a man of action. Dad was a man of, this is the right and the wrong thing, and you choose the right and you don't think very long about it. So Dad obviously saw his son down there struggling and jumped right in, knowing that something needed to be done. The workmen by that time made it over. They were trying to pull Joseph out, but covered in filth, and Joseph's size was not possible. And obviously the goal was to get Joseph's probably head to the opening for the fresh air. So Dad's last words on this earth to the workmen were, "You pull and I'm going to push." And he readjusted himself somehow underneath Joseph and propped him up. When my mom got there, she grabbed a tie strap, and they kind of wrapped it around Joseph's arms, underneath his arms. To this point, the workman had just been holding to his shirt, which is probably a miracle in itself that the shirt didn't rip. So the workman and Mom held the strap, just kind of holding Joseph there, waiting for more help. waiting for the emergency personnel to get there because they weren't strong enough to pull him out, and Dad being below Joseph, continuing to prop him up. Emergency people showed up anywhere from 10 to 12 minutes, pulled Joseph out, and then pulled my dad's body out, and he had already passed. And yeah, so obviously a tragic end, but a heroic end, an end that probably we all say we would love to be able to do, and maybe we wish we could do, and we pray that we'd have the grace to do it. But the way Dad ended his life is pretty much how Dad lived his life, and that's the power of his story. He was just always serving, he was always sacrificing, and in God's providence, he would serve and sacrifice till the end, given his life for his youngest son. And there's so many lessons to be learned, and obviously, the scripture verse always comes running. No greater love has a man than this, to lay down his life for his friend. And so that's the powerful story of his ending, which kind of gives light to how he lived his life.
Well, Chris, tell me, before we then talk more about the man behind that amazing, amazing deed, can you just focus with me a little bit? I've always been reticent to kind of draw you out any further or kind of even think about it further. It's just so dramatic. But in my focusing on what you're saying there, sometimes when you're kind of reliving, picturing this happening, questions come to your mind that maybe hadn't before of he was still under there holding Joseph up for a while as they were waiting for more help to come. He probably wasn't even able to speak at that point. So we don't have, much in the way of, communication, as you said, and those words are burned into my own memory, and they always will be. I mean, they're just so beautiful. You pull and I'll push. There's just something so your dad about that.
Yeah, for sure.
If I may, in just a moment, because I want to come back to right where I was, but just right there, just want to say, at not the funeral, but the viewing, I might have told you this, but I just want to share. There was that long receiving line, and there was your mom, sitting in a chair to make it through, and all the rest of you after her. But I came up, and I just kind of knelt down next to her, and I was just weeping, and gave her a hug. And I didn't share earlier that your older brothers were my roommates in college. So just to pause for a moment here, this is the blessing I have of this connection with your family is your oldest brothers, as you know, were my roommates here at Christendom College. And so I had gotten to know the family. Interestingly, the only people in my whole life that have ever called me Johnny were your brothers and my other roommates. And so the other person on the planet is your mother and your dad. So at the receiving line there, then I came up and I was just weeping, and I just didn't know what to say, and I'm hugging your mother, and she just says, "Johnny, he died with his boots on."
That's very true.
There's so much right there. But coming back to him in the tank with his boots on, holding up your brother, what thoughts might have been going through his mind. But again, we don't know of us having said anything, right? He's just under there for those last minutes of his life, doing everything in his power to hold him up.
Yeah, really, the workman was the only one else there. By the time Mom got there, he was already somehow under Joseph, and under Joseph doesn't necessarily mean under the filth. So, but you don't have to do a lot of Google searching to find out how long a normal human being can live with those fumes. But yeah, the miracles right off the bat are, how on earth did Joseph's t-shirt not tear being pulled on? How on earth did Dad, continue to prop Joseph up? Whether or not I don't think he was actually lifting. I think he tried to lift, realized that he couldn't lift. And so, well, what's got to get done's got to get done. And that's the farmer's way, is you don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about all the time, and you don't always have time to do it. It was just, what needs to be done in order to save my son? I need to get underneath him. And so whether or not that's taking a breath, whether or not that's, but yeah, the other miracle is how on earth did he continue to prop Joseph up for that period of time
Yeah.
until the emergency people got there? Yeah, I don't, yeah, in one sense, right, as a son, you don't want to think about those moments. And then another
Yeah.
sense, you do have those questions like, what was going through? Like, did he know? And that's where I'm like, Dad knew what he was doing, and sometimes we're called to do those things too, where we do something and then we look back and like, wow, I didn't realize I was capable of doing that. But
Yeah.
yeah, beyond those last words, we don't have anything to go on other than just doing the right thing in that moment.
I just imagine, you can let your imagination. I bet he was praying. I bet he was praying that
Sure,
he was
sure.
able to keep holding his son up.
Yeah, there was no doubt. There was prayers, silently or publicly to ask for Our Lady's intercession. It was her birthday. There aren't. What's the phrase about all things happen for a reason? It's all providence, right? Dad and Mom had a devotion to the Rosary. Dad did the Marian Day with many families to die on Mary's feast day, her birthday, saving his son. After what Our Lady went through with her son. There's so many connections, but undoubtedly he was asking for her intercession for his son. I mean, I doubt he was praying for his own life. He was praying for the life of his son, that his son may be spared.
Speaking of ladies, Chris, not often enough in thinking about these things do my thoughts turn to your mother.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, give us a little window. I mean, I'm sure there's volumes you could say right now, but just give us a little window into your mother and that day and the heroic sacrifice of your dad.
Yeah, I mean, mom's a spiritual rock, and again, a life of being a spiritual rock played out in that day too. There's so many, I've thought about that day and Mom probably holding Joseph when they pulled him out and, making connections to the Pietà in a different way, but
Sure.
similar of, sitting there while they pulled Dad's body out, and to see the love of your life. And Mom and Dad had a wonderful relationship, a wonderful marriage. And no, it wasn't perfect. But they were a team, and Dad was the leader, but Mom was, second in command, and they did so much together. And Dad was Mom's knight on the white horse, and the way she would talk about him, and they even would joke about how Dad one point made a comment like, "I hope I go first because I don't know if I could live without you," And I'm sure Mom made those comments too, as all couples in love, especially as they go through life, make those comments. But yeah, mom's strength, mom's faith, immediately, and also it's the military farmer wife, right? Is she realized Joseph was her priority, and grief did not overtake her judgment. We went straight to the hospital, and it was all hands on deck, and it was all focus on Joseph. And because they were obviously concerned that he was going to get sepsis, having been exposed to that, he never got sepsis, which again is another miracle.
Wow.
And Mom was right next to him the entire time, even to the point of when do we do Dad's funeral, because Joseph needs to be there and he was in the hospital and he's the priority. So yeah, Mom showed so much that, again, she demonstrated day in and day out, just like Dad did in their daily lives. But to see her go through that and to be a rock, but at the same time to lose your loved one, the person you've shared your life with, I can't imagine it.
Sure.
And she's a very strong woman.
Well, just hearing all this just makes you want to know more. And of course, we're only here in our time together can be able to consider so much more, and we're going to certainly have you share where people can learn more. But help us now then, as you said earlier, I like that way of putting it, kind of that this makes you, kind of shines a light backwards, it gives us a renewed interest to go back and say, what kind of man is it that would be in a position to do this kind of thing? Of course, obviously there was a special grace that was given him here, but at the same time, as the philosophers say, action follows upon being. There's a great spiritual, what you do follows upon who you are. There's a great spiritual kind of principle in try to be heroic every day so that we're prepared for the more specific, kind of on the site, in the moment, demanding situation. And it seems that your dad is a very good instance of this. And so we have this interest to go back. Okay, tell us more. Tell us more. I mean, just from my perspective, I can't say I ever knew your dad really well. Had some fun conversations with him, have some fun memories, but I just so wish I'd looked a little closer. Right, I'd asked some more questions. I'd been a better observer. When I would come over and be blessed to have dinner with the family. So, but I've got you here. Just give us a little bit of a window. And this is a man of his household.
Yes.
This is a husband.
Yeah.
This is a father.
Yeah.
He had a very strong sense. He and your mom were very intentional in how they raised their sons.
Yeah.
That was obvious from the first moment that I met your brothers, and then met them. So can you just give us a little bit more of a window into him as kind of the family man in the home?
Yeah. Dad and mom were a team, but dad was the unquestioned leader, head of the household, so to speak. And they were a team, and oftentimes, mom would be the one going to dad and saying, I think we need to do this. And dad would take it from there and make sure they would talk about it, agree upon it, and then action was taken. And specifically the head of the household, in charge of the family, I think specifically in two ways: leader and guardian, or leader and protector, call it what you will. A leader in the sense that, especially with regards to the faith, I mean, mom and dad together, but dad as the head of the family was leading his family closer to Christ day in and day out, usually by the way he served and his example, but also sometimes by just what he made the family do. And I say leader, dad wasn't this authoritarian type A bull in a china shop. It's my way. This is my family. We are doing things this way. That was not my dad. And that, that.
Yeah.
The people that don't know him might not know that. Dad was a soft-spoken, patient, smart, determined man. But when it came to the faith, he led and he protected. He led. Him and mom, there are non-negotiables. Sunday Mass was never discussed. It was, this is what the family does. Or once we moved into Virginia, shortly after, we started doing a Wednesday holy hour at one of the parishes. And it was not an option. It was, we are doing this as a family because we believe this is what our family and our sons need for their salvation, to form them spiritually. The other big part was the daily family rosary. And this was kind of, for my brothers, these are some of our strongest memories, is every night the family said the family rosary. And I'm sure we missed a few times, but by and large, it happened. And some of the days were pretty intense. I mean, dad was a very disciplined man. He did a lot with his time. He was not a workaholic. But, say, for example, in the summertime, dad would get up at 4 a.m. He'd go on a 7-mile run because he needed to keep his blood pressure down in order to be a pilot. So he ran. Then he would change his clothes, go to DC, fly back and forth to DC to New York, which was his, get home at 4 o'clock, change real quickly, go help the sons finish baling hay to bring in the college money, unload the hay in the barn. And dad, this is in July in Virginia, dad always chose the worst job, which was in the hay loft, in the barn. So unloading the hay, he was in the spot where it was the hottest, the dustiest, the itchiest, the sweatiest. He could have said, sons, get in there. I'm the old man, or, I need the fresh air. No, this is where he led by example. And that was how he did most of his life. And so, but my point is that he did this 7 or 7:30, we had dinner, 8:15 or 8:30, everybody's exhausted. Mom says, all right, family rosary. And we all, oh, it's such a long day. I want to go to sleep. And there was no question. Everybody goes to the living room, and dad would always drop to his knees. Dad did the family rosary on his knees. And it didn't matter what he did that day. I mean, to the point where he would cramp up, regularly. I mean, he kept a bottle of apple cider vinegar, which dad was a big believer in, because he'd rub it on his muscles when he'd cramp up. And so my point in all of that is not to make dad seem like a superhero, but he did a lot with his time, and he led by example. So leader in the faith, leader with regards to raising the kids, like you said, very intentional, and guardian, protector. Him and mom believe very strongly in their role as parents is to nurture but also protect their children. And something simple as we never had cable television growing up. We watched, we would watch sports on the rabbit ears, if the audience even knows what rabbit ears are anymore, and a lot of Western movies. That was ours. And then I remember getting Dish Network for the first time. Of course, it was like 4 years old. Had already passed, but the idea of pausing live television just so we didn't watch commercials. And whether or not it was just because dad was a man or mom and dad together, but they knew somehow what video and images, the damage that could wreak with sons especially. And they felt it was their job to guard their sons from that. Something as simple as that. Friends, the brothers we all talk about. And as I'm talking with the brothers and going over stories, we realize that basically every house that mom and dad moved into, within a year or two, if it did not have a pool, dad installed a pool and a basketball court, and we'd have go-karts. And those stories are legendary. You probably have heard some in college. But a bunch of it, the reason was so that dad and mom's sons and their friends would play at the Vander Woude house. And so dad and mom were able to observe and kind of watch, not in a controlling way, but they knew who we were spending time with and what our activities were. Another simple rule growing up was we weren't allowed to do sleepovers. And it was just this rule, and we all argued for it, but I think it was just mom and dad's like, nope, it's just not happening. We believe it's better this way, just as a way to protect and guard their sons growing up. So unquestionably, dad was the leader, the head of the house, but it was primarily, leadership is used so frequently nowadays, but dad was the true biblical leader in the sense that service and sacrifice for those who were under his leadership. It was serve and sacrifice for his wife, serve and sacrifice for his sons, and lead them somewhere, right? If there's not a journey happening, there's no leading going on. You're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
Nobody's following you. And dad, it was definitely leading to Christ, but also leading for his sons to be, and those all around him actually, just leading by his dedication and service and example of being better people.
Yep. Yep. Um, I love the examples, and they sound so simple now in retrospect, but I'm sure that was tough. I'm sure that was on both your father and your mother's part. That took sacrifice. You and your brothers were not pushovers, full of life, and I'm sure you let your feelings be known about some of those
Oh yeah, I mean,
rules.
and we all talk about the 10:30 p.m. rosary nights where we're just like, oh, we have school tomorrow. I haven't done my homework, and just you're trying different excuses all the time. The other thing, I just came to mind. I just want to mention is dad the Sunday. For dad, Sunday was sacred and it was family and it was actual recreation. I described kind of a day of dad. Well, Sunday was the one day that I saw dad relax. He'd actually sit down, we'd go to mass, we'd have brunch, he'd read a newspaper, he'd take a nap. But they made a decision of no organized team sports on Sunday, and many of my brothers are very good athletes, and so there was definitely opportunities. But you talk about something that wasn't easy. I think keeping Sunday holy and family is something they were very intentional. And granted, this is 20, 25 years ago, it was a little easier, but still, it was very intentional that Sunday was a day for the Lord and then a day for the family, and the joy that dad got out of seeing the family together, whether or not it's barbecues or going on vacation. Those are some of the best pictures in my mind of just seeing, us all being goofy and he's just sitting there just kind of drinking it all in and just didn't have to be the center of attention by far and just loved being with the family.
Now, I love this image of Sunday. Now you mentioned sports, and you can't. Yeah, we have to consider sports in relation to your dad. The gym at Christendom College is named after him, and with good reason. He was an athletic director. He was also a great basketball coach. Some of his sons have followed in his, including you and one of your brothers. I know have both been done quite a bit of successful basketball coaching. And so clearly your dad had a conviction that sports can be a great part of family life. It's fascinating also, though. I mean, it speaks so much about kind of already what his approach to sports was by how he treats Sunday. And I hadn't remembered that, of no organized sports on Sunday. I'm sure that was a sacrifice too. But just tell us a little bit about your dad's approach to sports growing
Yeah,
up and in general.
yeah, and I think it all kind of ends a lens of one of the best things I think for mom and dad is they had a great way of keeping their priorities and keeping a perspective, and that's how they saw sports. So growing up, dad was a great athlete, we're told. I've talked with a few people that have gone to high school with him, played football and basketball, and did very well. And then once he started having sons, I think I don't know who introduced who to what, but I'm sure it was a little bit of both. But he was always involved. He coached all the sons at all different levels. And on all different sports. When they got to Seton, they needed a soccer coach. Dad had never coached soccer, but his sons wanted to play soccer, so he literally went to the library and took out books to learn what this whole soccer thing was.
Wow.
But dad was a very good coach, and his approach, I think, was obviously he believed. One, I think dad was a big believer in idle time is not a good thing, especially for boys, and because his I don't know if I should say love, but dad, his working, hard work, and doing your daily duty. And dad embraced work. Dad embraced, he chose to live on the farm at the end. He didn't have to. And I think much of that was to make sure that his sons stayed engaged and we got to do things with him and his grandkids. I mean, some of the older grandkids have great memories of working with Papa, or handing him a wrench while he's working on a car. But back to sports. Obviously, dad learned growing up and at some point believed so strongly in sports is good for the mind, the soul, and the body. And there are things that you learn in sports that you might not learn in any other area. And especially I think for dad, it was the ability to deal with hardship and challenge, especially physically as a man, and to train your body and to kind of own your body, because there's an element of that in sports is mind over matter, and nobody wants to run a suicide, and everybody, but you're going to do it. And also just the teamwork, they're all, whether or not it's the discipline, the teamwork, but also just the formation, so many good things can come from sports if it's properly directed. And there's a famous quote about that. And dad was a big believer in sports properly directed. And properly directed means, you compete and you work your hardest, but let the chips fall where they may. And at the end of the day, dad was not the one to go on a tirade and every loss there was an excuse. Generally every loss was his desire was that you learn from it and you became a better player but also a better person. And I think he understand that in those times of adversity, especially the losses, some of the best virtues and character traits can be formed when you lose, when you're kind of just broken. And so, yeah, it was a big part of the Vander Woude family. Dad was always there. I'm sure it was also dad's way of being physically present with us. He always
Yeah.
chose jobs that allowed him to be around more, to be present more. And sports was exactly the same. He got to coach and he got to go and watch games. And yeah, so much to the point where Chris Numbs and then, also Seton High School, both the courts are named after him, not only because of his example as a coach, but I think also the amount of people that he coached and touched and were profoundly impacted by his example, his demeanor, and just as a Catholic man. Yeah, I think there's quite a few that were impacted by him.
I just love thinking about sports through that angle. It's amazing how the example of one man can highlight such basic truths, and it just seems to me to bring out an amazing aspect of Tom Vander Woude is he put first things first.
Mm-hmm.
He had his priorities right. He had his heart set on what matters. As you've emphasized, he was a man of deep faith, great love for the Lord, had a very keen sense of what that means for how you live and for what kind of relationships you need to have. And everything is seen in light of that. But there's also this wonderful aspect of it shows the richness of life. When you put first things first, the beauty comes out. I mean, all these images that you're painting, not that life wasn't hard, not that it was perfect, but there's so much joy, there's so much beauty in just thinking about that work, that hard work, that prayer time, that taking the rest together on Sunday. That life has so many beautiful aspects, even amidst the suffering, when you put first things first. And it's so lovely to see that kind of exemplified in a very simple, down to earth. I mean, your dad's always simple, down to earth, right? And other than his last moments on Earth, there really isn't anything particularly extraordinary, is there? Am I wrong on that?
No. And quite honestly, I think that's the power of his story. And that's one of the reasons why I feel so strongly that his story needs to be shared for people to be aware, because he's a simple, ordinary man that, to a certain extent, he did those simple, ordinary things in an extraordinary way. And that kind of prepared him for dying in an extraordinary way. No, he was a simple, ordinary guy that, played sports, loved his family, loved to fly planes, was a farmer, loved working on cars. Him and I have so many memories just because of the age, the timing of it on the farm, of working on cars or chopping a lot of firewood. But but yeah, even in this process, one of the things is you have to research and find out all the stuff that the person wrote, because they scrutinize that. And
Yeah.
luckily, Dad didn't write a lot. Um, and that's the power, in one sense. The power of his story is that I think we all can do some extraordinary things, but I think sometimes we aim for those, right? We should just aim at
Yeah.
doing, and Dad was a huge believer in do your daily duty. If your
Yeah.
daily duty is a student, then you need to be a good student. If your daily duty is to be a husband, then do that and just do it well. And so, yeah, the simpleness, the ordinary of him, I think speaks. And I think that's why a lot of people are drawn to Dad's story, because there's so many different ways to relate. And he was so simple. But you talked about the joy when you keep first things first. And so many people, that's one of the first things they talk about Dad, is he had this smile, this joy. Some people have that ability to, like, when they talk, you're the only person in the world. And for Dad, it was always that. And he cared so deeply, and he was so genuine. At the base core, it was just doing the simple things, being a good man, and doing everything the best that he could.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something also very, I wish I could convey, um, again, from my limited perspective of him. In a sense, while he's so great, he's also very non-threatening, because he was so down to earth. He wasn't the most articulate man that you're ever going to run into, in the sense of, he wasn't the one that wants to stand up and and give a speech. He's not the one that's here. Let me step forward and explain everything. Although, right, when he had everyone come to his house for a May Day in honor of the Blessed Mother, he'd get up and
Yep.
he would.
Yep.
He'd lead a prayer. He'd say what needed to be said, but he wasn't looking to have the microphone
No.
in front of his mouth.
No.
But he was very unassuming, and funny. You just keep coming back to the same words. And I just want to say a couple things that you wouldn't so much have said yourself. First of all, the athletic aspect. He was an outstanding coach. And this has shown up also. Just the Vander Woudes are famous for their sports for a reason. It's not necessarily that you were being national champions, but you're always just central members. Any team that you're on, the spirit that all of you brothers have had, whether you're on the court, on the field, or whether you're coaching, it's just one beautiful testimony. It's one piece of the pie of something where, in a beautiful way, what your father did is still shining forth. It's not always this way. That that a good man is completely known by, although it is very biblical, that a good man is known by his sons, by his children. And there's freedom, and children will do as they do, and you don't simply judge a man by children because of the great and wonderful gift of human freedom. At the same time, there's that fascinating aspect of Scripture does honor parents, as it were, through what their children do. And I just, from my perspective, a quick, again, meeting your brothers, just there was something that stood out about them from the first, that I'm not trying to canonize them. There was just something very beautiful, very rich, that now getting to know, having through the years come to know the story of the family better. It's like, yep, all the pieces fit together. These young men clearly had a relationship with their father, and they had a clear sense of who they were. They had a clear sense of what's most important in life, and they were in no way bashful about making that clear and doing all that they could to live by that. And I want to have noted that You're a few years my junior. You were one of those uppity younger guys that when the older brothers would bring me home to the homestead for a little break from the college, we'd see you all and have a chance to have a lot of fun. And that actually probably was a beautiful aspect of you got even more time there on the homestead, still doing the haymaking. I was able to get involved in a little bit of haymaking, verify firsthand what you said about your dad wasn't going to be outdone in working with his hands. That's for sure. Any that I want to ask you in a moment again how people can learn more, how they could be involved in if they're interested to in trying to promote his cause. Just I want to get any other insight, anything else you'd like to share about growing up with your dad, any anecdote that you would share, not to put you on the spot.
Sure. Yes. Well, first off, you talk about dad's approachability. Dad was also very humble. And I think in one sense, this whole process is probably irritating him that he's getting talked about so much because he did not like to be, in the public eye unless, like you said, he's willing to step forward. But yeah, a couple other things come to mind. One is, dad and mom also started doing their own holy hours once a week. And so dad generally did the 2 to 3 a.m. holy hour. Um, and he did that no matter what was going on. So sometimes he would do the 2 to 3 holy hour in his airline pilot suit. And then instead of go home, he would just head to the airport to fly. But his spiritual life, and it's the quiet life, right? No, nobody, probably only a handful of people knew the person doing the 3 to 4 and the family, but it's just that quiet strength and interior prayer life. But yeah, some anecdotes and some memories. I think one of the biggest things is we never really talked about it, but at some point dad obviously realized the importance of doing stuff with his sons, doing stuff with his kids. And I'm sure that was in large part for why him and mom got the farm when they moved to Virginia, was this idea of quality time. In that sense, he kind of was a man ahead of his time because he had quality time, but it was doing stuff with his sons, and it wasn't this something we're going to go do quality time and hang out together. It was cutting firewood together. It was come help me work on the car together. It was just spending lots of time doing stuff. And I think it's simple and ordinary, but I think sometimes it's overlooked, the ability for parents and children, but especially I think in this, fathers and sons, to spend time doing stuff just together. And it wasn't that we weren't having these deep conversations, right? Dad's working on a car. I'm just handing him a wrench every 7 minutes. But we're there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, looking at the same thing. Our attention's there. And every now and then, dad's going to ask, hey, how's that sports, how's baseball going? But he did that with all his sons at different times. And there was always this desire to be involved in our lives and to have us present. It was very rarely was it, no, I got to do something, I don't want you coming along. It was, how can I do this from dad's perspective? How can I do this in a way that I can allow my sons to participate, or to allow my grandkids to participate? Like I said, he was doing work on the farmhouse, and some of the older grandkids still have memories. They would just walk up at 9:30 a.m. because they were so excited to work with Papa, that day. And so just being present to his sons and his grandsons are some of the biggest things that stick with me.
Of course, I can well imagine. Just a quick question: to what extent did he ever kind of have a father-son talk with you? I'm going to put you on the spot, but facts of life, or just the realm of interacting with women, or preparing to be a man. And was he the guy that would kind of bring any of those things up explicitly? Obviously, he was always patterning these things, but what about that?
No, he wasn't one to sit us down and have big talks. It was, we have a 3-minute conversation on the way to a basketball practice if something comes up, or him and mom observe something at school. So they kind of say, so what's going on with that? I saw you, spending time with so-and-so, or what's that friend like?
Mm-hmm.
On that note, specifically as a father now and a husband, how we observed dad's relationship with mom obviously taught us so much.
Sure.
I talked about priorities and perspective, and dad being a generally calm, patient, determined man. But if we said anything disrespectful to mom, the wrath of dad would come down very quickly. And I think we all learned at a very early age, for some reason, we need to treat mom different or uniquely, and seeing their interaction. But no, there wasn't a
Yeah.
lot of, hey, after dinner, oh no, dad's looking at me. Like, hey, Chris, we need to go for a walk. I'm like, oh, shoot, here it comes. No, there weren't a lot of those moments.
Well, but of course, the interesting thing there is if the whole habitual disposition is very close, very engaged, very aware, ready to point something out, ready to bring something up if it comes along, patterning it, in his interaction with your mother. I mean, of course, there's different styles that men will have, and it's just interesting to get an angle into different ways that fathers do the key thing of being really engaged.
Yeah, and I think also on that note, Dad was a man of few words. He was a man of action, but he was a man of few words. But those few words you like pay really
Yeah.
attention to. If Dad made a comment like, "You're just not yourself around so and so," sure, you just kind of shirk it off, but then you go to bed at night going, "Holy cow, Dad just dropped the hammer," by saying something like that, and you'd self-reflect because he wasn't quick to talk. He thought before he talked. And usually, if he said something direct like that, that's something that might even be critical. We understood that there was probably a very good reason for him saying it, and we should probably take note.
Yeah. Chris, it just brings to mind as we wrap up here the whole notion of God's great providence, the role of good examples for us, and that the church in her wisdom seeks to take certain men and women and hold them up and say, look, these aren't the only ones who are in heaven by any stretch, but they're ones that not only do we have confidence that they achieved a real level of holiness, but also in God's providence, they have something that we can all learn from. This respects how there's room for difference. There's different ways of being holy. There's different ways of being virtuous. There's different ways of being spouses and parents. But there's basic themes. Those themes show up in different ways. And I'm never going to be exactly like your dad. I wouldn't be capable of it. But I mean,
He'd
even if
probably say that's
I
a good
do
thing.
all that God, is calling me to. In any case, it would look different, but there's just so many things there where just listening to these gives me so much to think about, to take note. Yeah, and it's so good to be able to see it through the eyes of a son, just right now, the way that you're able to reflect back, how it moved you then. Again, I'm sure we could draw you out and you could say things, well, I wish he had such and such, and I wish he had such and such, right? I mean, we didn't, I'm not going to draw you out on that at the moment, but that's all part of the picture. No one's trying to hide that. But
Yeah, and I joked about Dad being mad at this whole process, but Dad would be the first. Dad was not perfect, and I think in one sense that's another power of his story is, right? We're told that saints are just sinners that keep trying and they
yeah,
cooperate with God's grace in the moment, in the day, and I think that's the power of Dad's story. So yeah, I totally agree. And that's kind of why, kind of the fuse has been lit, so to speak, to now it's time to kind of spread Dad's story. And luckily, I think there are a lot of people that want to hear it. And the people that already know his story are excited to spread it as well.
great. Well, then for people listening to this, other than them taking this podcast and sharing it, because you've done a great job, very moving job of just sharing the story right there. Where can people find more about your dad? Where, if they want to get involved in the work that you're starting, can they go?
Sure. Yeah. The first place is just the Tom Vander Woude Guild. So the website is TVW, Tom Vander Woude, tvwguild.org. And that has some pretty good information. We are working on redesigning it a little bit to include more information as we kind of really try to spread the work. Specifically for me, I'm kind of leaning. I will be going full time at trying to spread his story, traveling around. So if there are individuals or parishes or organizations that want to have me come and give a talk on Dad's life, or specifically aimed at a certain audience, whether or not that's fathers or young people, you can reach out to me also in my email. It's pretty easy to remember now that you know the story. It's fifthvwson@gmail.com. So it's the number 5 THVWSON@gmail.com, or the tvwguild.org. And also on that website, if you have prayer requests, if you have spiritual favors that have been granted because you're praying to my dad, you can submit those also. And there's a way to get a newsletter to receive updates as hopefully they will happen in the few months and years as we start to kind of really work to share his story with the hopes of his process opening, which I feel pretty good about. And especially, it's one thing that I just didn't mention, so I have to mention it now, is I wasn't aware of this, but in 2017, Pope Francis, in a motu proprio, announced that the offer of one's life is a new path to sainthood in addition to heroic virtue and martyrdom. Obviously, we feel very strongly that Dad obviously offered his life.
Sure.
And following in that, not that he has a right to it, but we feel in faith that it might be God's plan if his cause does open.
Sure, absolutely. And you all are a 501c3, and you're going to be raising some money because you're going to need to have some support in making the story known and working out these things. That's right?
Yeah, that's definitely right. Thank you for bringing that up. I forget that sometimes. But yeah, it's a 501c3. And so right now we're fundraising to allow me to kind of, for the next couple of years, to really take on this mission, this ministry of spreading Dad's story far and wide. And then, if the cause does open, there are some significant expenses associated with that process. That's also part of my work to fundraise for the eventual cause once it's opened.
And in your understanding is there's nothing unfitting at all. There's a great tradition of praying for the intercession of someone, even who hasn't erected. There's not going to be public prayers done or masses said in the honor of, but there's a great tradition for people asking for the intercessory prayer of someone that we hope is in heaven. And that's something I didn't draw you out on that, but I think there's already some people have been doing that. Some people have had some stories to tell about that, and so there's nothing that could be very fitting to. I'll share. I certainly do that myself, but
yeah, and obviously we do. The family does. We're aware of a number of people either that knew Dad individually, have been pray to him every night, especially some young fathers, just asking for his guidance, and we also know of people that are praying for very specific intentions. You even call them praying for miracles, and believing that somebody is in heaven obviously gives us that ability, even if they are not officially canonized. So yes, we do, and we're aware that there definitely are many people that do it as well.
Well, I certainly wish you all the best. I am so excited. I'm so glad you've been willing to share this story. I think it's going to be a real gift to many in God's providence, whatever exactly comes next. There's just, in God's great providence, there's so much that we can learn, and you are a great voice to be able to share these things with others. So we wish you all the best in that.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for taking the time here today.
You're very welcome, John. It was a great joy and pleasure. So I appreciate you letting me come on.
Take care. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in this episode of The Intentional Household. If you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating or review. If you have any topic requests, please send them to lifecraftgroup@gmail.com. For our Wednesday reflections, free courses, reading groups, and live events, please visit life-craft.org.